I'm going to talk about time in my matrix coming next, but I want you to understand some of the effects of ownership in relationship to time. Ownership in my asset. I can choose less and less time to invest, but I might be giving up pieces of ownership and control in choosing less and less. Is it direct and linear? No. But are they generally related? Yes, they generally are related. What's my way around that? Direct ownership active gets you very engaged and very busy and takes a lot of time. But if you're direct ownership and you have an expert between you and the process of that asset, that allows what would have been a very active investment to become effectively a more passive investment. I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter. It's so good to have you here today. I want to talk and I want to expand your education. Your choice to be educated in real estate will make all the difference in your success in you investing in real estate. Why? If you walk into a situation, and real estate is not simple. Let's backtrack. Real estate's not inherently simple. When you're involved in real estate, one of the things that you're going to find is that there really is industry-specific knowledge that you're going to want to have access to. So let's talk about some of that industry-specific knowledge, but also let's talk about a much broader understanding, which is your financial education. So today, I want to talk about in that overview of financial education and real estate specific knowledge. Today, I want to talk about ownership, time and ownership in real estate. The amount of time that you need to invest is directed by your ownership, or the amount of your ownership can direct the time necessary. And your ownership can also affect your control. So let's take a little moment just to look at these two basic ideas about real estate time, investments, and ownership. All right, so let's talk about what is my time investment in real estate and what is the time I have to invest? You see, if you're a doctor or a plumber, or you run your own company, you're a landscaper, you're an entrepreneur, or you're a lawyer, maybe you work for somebody else, but basically your boss tells you you're going to be working long hours, or you're an entrepreneur, which almost for all of us being an entrepreneur demands that we work long hours. It might be that our time that we have available to invest in real estate is very small or limited. It might be 1 to 3 hours. Or maybe you're a part-time somebody, a part-time mom, a part-time worker. You might work part-time at your job. You might work part-time as a consultant. You might have a lot of control over your time, but still need to work some of the time. And so therefore you have a medium amount of time available per week to give over to your running your investments. That might be 20 hours a week, might be 15 hours a week. Or maybe you're the other end of the spectrum and you're like, you know what, I don't have anything else I'm doing. I'm just investing in real estate. And that investing in real estate might be, I want to actively invest, like I want to flip properties, or that investment might look like I'm an investor. I'm not engaged in active activity with my real estate, but I have a lot of time to give to my real estate if I choose to. Your amount of time might affect how you choose to own something. And what I mean by that is, well, let's look at it. It's right here. Direct ownership active. I own it. I'm running it. If I'm owning a flip and I'm running a flip, trust me, that's a lot of time per day, per week. If I'm owning a flip and I'm running a 200-unit apartment building by myself, that's a lot of time per day, per week. If I own it and I'm running it myself and it's a single family residence and I'm the landlord, I'm the one taking the phone calls, and it's just one, I have just one unit and it's a single family, maybe that doesn't take so much of my time. Maybe it's only a couple hours a week. Maybe that's fine. But what if I want to grow my portfolio and now I have 10 single families and I'm running them myself? That might require more time. Direct ownership active in general takes more time in general. Not always, but in general. Direct ownership passive. What is direct ownership passive? I own it, but somebody else is running it. I own it, but there's an expert between me and running that project. That usually frees up a lot of time. It's pretty good for that mid-level owner or for an owner that has a very high amount of demand from their regular JOB, and being able to own something that would be too complex for them to run themselves, but because they're an expert, there's an expert between them and the asset, it allows them to be passive. There's a securitized note. That means I don't own it. I don't run it. Somebody else owns it. Somebody else is running the project. But I have a note securitized or backed by a piece of real estate. You can see how if I have a note, it's not going to require a lot of time. Basically, once a month, I want to make sure I get paid. Once I get the money, I want to make sure I get paid until it's time for them to pay me off. So I look at it up front. I look at it every month. I get paid off and I make sure they pay me off at the end on time. A fund. I do all my work up front on a fund. I look at it, but pretty much during the life of the fund, I don't really get a lot from it. Maybe they send me a payment every month. Maybe they don't. I don't really get to vote. At the end of the fund, they send me the money. I may not even be able to vote on the end of the fund. So a fund is generally considered the least time intensive of your investments. So you can see direct ownership active can take a lot of time. Flipping, running a multi-unit, servicing that unit yourself, running a storage unit yourself, takes a lot of time. That can be active. Direct ownership passive, securitized notes, and fund. Now I'm going to go on to my next slide, and I want you to see this here. So I go through what does my ownership mean? Not just on my time. What does my ownership mean? If I have direct ownership and I'm active, I own it, I run it. Not only is my time going to be used to run the asset, I have a lot of ownership over the choices on what happens to that asset. I have a lot of choices on whether or not I have control over those choices. And I literally mean that differently. I have a choice to have the choice to control it. Because you'll see as we go down, that's not always the case. I have ownership on the asset, so I choose to keep it or not. I have the choice to run it the way I want to, and those choices are mine. I own it, I run it. Now, I have yet to declare an asset, don't I? I haven't said I'm a direct owner of blank. The blank can be a single family residence, a multifamily, a storage unit, industrial property, a strip mall, retail, office buildings in downtown LA, office buildings in Knoxville, Tennessee, land in orchard as an orchard that is bringing in hardwoods. I own it, I run it. It's a lot of time. I get a lot of choices. I have a lot of power in my ownership. It's agnostic to the asset. Direct ownership passive. I own it, somebody else runs it. It could mean I own a storage unit, but I hire a company who runs the storage unit. It could mean I own a mobile park, but I hire a manager to run the mobile park. It affects the amount of time that I'm engaged with the asset, but it doesn't necessarily stop my capacity to, one, own the asset, therefore control it and make decisions about it, buying or selling. It also doesn't stop me from controlling what's happening on the asset. If I am telling my storage, let's say I own storage units, and I'm telling my property manager what I want them to do, they can make a lot of choices, but ultimately they should make choices that will abide by my general guidelines. Direct ownership passive. Doesn't always run that way. Let me give you another example. It could be that you have direct ownership in an LLC or in a partnership that owns a multi-unit. You could have signed an agreement that says, yes, you're a direct owner in it, but that you're a limited partner. What that means is that you might have a little bit of say, or you might have very little say in the day-to-day activity, but you probably do have a lot of say in purchasing it and when to sell it and what the general activity with that asset is going to be. So you probably have a lot of say in that. And if they're going to change strategies, You probably have a lot of say in them changing the strategy. Passive ownership, direct ownership, passive activity. That's my ownership in it. What's my control? Securitized note. I don't own it. I don't run it. What I have control over is the terms of the note. I get paid a certain amount. I get paid on a certain date. And if they don't pay me back my principal by a certain end time, I either renew or I make them pay me out. That's all I get. I don't get to decide how they're going to run it. I don't get to decide how they're going to run the flip. I don't get to decide the paint color inside the flip. If it's a storage unit, I don't get to decide if they're going to build more units or not. I don't get to decide if they're going to subdivide the units they have. I don't get to decide any of those things. All I get to do is hold the note. But I also don't take the risk of all those decisions. The last is a fund. I have effectively what's considered a share or a stock. I didn't put stock up here because it's not really a stock. You can't sell it on the open market, but you can sell it. You can sell your interest. But you basically have very, very limited voting rights. You don't generally get to choose once you invest what they're going to invest in. You generally don't get to choose if they're going to change their plan or not. You generally don't get to choose if it's going to be 3 years, 8 years, or 10 years. You only get to choose at the very beginning. I am going to choose in. I like the idea. I like the numbers. I trust the team. I like the asset and what they're going to do, and I like the team. Those are my two choices when I'm making an investment in a fund. I choose to give them my money. They get to choose everything else. That means I have the least amount of control in that asset. And I would stair-step this down on purpose. So if you consider time, you also might want to consider ownership, because you don't have to accept that if you have less time, that you have to have less control in all of the ownership. You can do direct ownership passive and still have some rights in running the asset. Or you can do a fund, which is truly passive, in that you generally also don't have any rights. So I want to highlight what I've done. Let's move backtrack. What I've done is I've highlighted time, because I'm going to talk about time when I talk about the time return matrix, or time, it's not a time return matrix, it's the time effort matrix. I'm going to talk about time in my matrix coming next, but I want you to understand some of the effects of ownership in relationship to time. Ownership in my asset. I can choose less and less time to invest, but I might be giving up pieces of ownership and control in choosing less and less. Is it direct and linear? No. But are they generally related? Yes, they generally are related. What's my way around that? Direct ownership active gets you very engaged and very busy and takes a lot of time. But if you're direct ownership and you have an expert between you and the process of that asset, that allows what would have been a very active investment to become effectively a more passive investment. If you do a securitized note, in general, that is usually more passive, in general, right? But the fund is the one where you go, I don't have a lot of control and I have not invested a lot of time. Those two go together. But if I'm not comfortable with that, then I can backtrack up to direct ownership passive, being as passive as I possibly can, but still having some direct ownership gives me more voting rights. So there is a difference in controlling your time. Direct ownership active, you can choose to be direct ownership passive. If you don't want to be direct ownership passive, you can step all the way back to a fund, which is fine. But if a fund's too far back, then direct ownership passive is kind of a nice middle point. Securitized notes, kind of a nice middle point. I hope this made sense. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Real Estate Breakthrough Show. I am your host, Christina Suter. Tune in next week for our next educational segment.